Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The first FDomes webinar about approaching permission processes. My name is Joanna and I'm a sales director at FDomes. However, today I feel more like the news reporter with everything I have here and around me. Just to start with, throughout the whole webinar, you can ask your questions on the chat. So if any of the subjects that is going along the way you have the questions about, just put them in the chat and we will answer them at the very end of the webinar during the Q&A section. Today I'm really excited to be accompanied by Ruben, who is the founder of the American Glamping Association. I had a chance to meet Ruben several times, and I like to say that he's more of a friend than a business partner now. But I think I will let Ruben introduce himself. Hi, Ruben. Nice to see you again.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and how we are going to approach this webinar? What is Glamping Association doing so that we can then nicely navigate to the topics of the webinar?
So I am the founder and executive director of the American Glamping Association, but I got into glamping close to 15 years ago. I started a company called Glamping Hub, which is a kind of online booking platform for glamping. And at that point, nobody was really representing the unique outdoor hospitality and glamping space. And so we started the company to be able to provide options for people who are travelers and those who are the operators to, get more bookings. And so through that, started a manufacturer, have done a lot of consulting with many of the kind of big and name brands all the way down to smaller mom and pops throughout the space. And so, we started the association to be able to provide tools and resources and a network and a community to anybody and everybody in the space. And so happy to be here today. This topic in general is complicated, but it's very important. And so hopefully throughout the conversation today can give everybody a little bit more background, a little bit more education, and hopefully a little bit more context, which helps everybody. Doesn't matter at what stage or where you're at or what country or what type of project you're doing. When you have a little bit more context about how the industry maneuvers and how the industry works, you're able to make better decisions as you come across these challenges, because it doesn't matter what kind of project you're working on. There's going to be just unforeseen challenges, and especially for the permitting permissions on the front end side of this project, it's hard. It's not an easy thing to accomplish. So hopefully, by the time that you guys are done listening to this, you've got a little bit more confidence into what your next steps could look like.
Definitely, as you mentioned, and I also want to underline it. We have today listeners and attendees from 30 different countries. So I was like in awe when I saw it. I was like, 30 countries, that's really great. And even though we are talking with Ruben, who is from the US, the information that we are going to share with you and the context, as Ruben mentioned, is going to be valid for all the countries around the world, actually, because we are looking at very broad context, and then we will be trying to navigate it to a little bit tighter, I would say, subject of the permissions. Still, we would need to look at the same documents and kind of mindset regardless of the country we are at. So maybe let's start with the plan of the webinar and what we can see here. We will be talking and we will be starting from, as I said, the broader subject. So is my land good, or what land should I find? So the land selection. Then we will nicely go through permission process. Then we will tackle the subject of documentation, ending up on how the American Glamping Association and FDomes can help potential clients, to basically get the things done. So what to take, what to get in order to kind of complete the subject. And well, It was always the funniest thing for me. I don't know how about you, Ruben, but the question that I'm often asked is this plot the right plot? Is this land the right land? And I'm like, my God, like for glamping, each land is the right land because it's all about, and we can actually see it in the pictures here. We have different types of locations. We can have a desert. We can have like the mountain somewhere here. We have woods. We have the cities. And actually, in my opinion, there is nothing like good or bad land for glamping. It's just the question you need to ask yourself is who will be my target group and how much I want to invest in my land to create glamping. Because we can start from the very remote areas like the forests with the risk and having in mind that when having a land in the forest which is totally remote, we need to invest in infrastructure, we need to invest in solar, sewage tanks, water tanks, maybe doing it well. Whereas when having a land closer to the city, we kind of sacrifice this feeling of being remote, but we have easier access to the media. What's your opinion about it?
Yeah, when people are choosing what land works for them, I think there's a few questions you should probably ask yourself. But at the end of the day, there is no perfect piece of land. It just has to be perfect for you and for what you are, your budget, what you're trying to accomplish, the experience that you're giving to your guest. So the magic word for this scenario is always kind of depends, right? It depends on your budget, depends on how many units you want to put, the additional amenities you want to put in there, what you can afford and what the county or the state allows you to, or the local jurisdiction allows you to actually, put together. And so I always come back to the whole concept of you have to be the one who wakes up every single morning and is energized about the potential of this, because nobody else is going to get you motivated. You have to look at it and say, you really want for your guests so that it makes business sense. Because at the end of the day, if it's not going to make business sense, it's just not going to work, right? And we talk about this a lot, where there's this dangerous line between projects being a business and projects being a hobby. And a hobby is great, but it's not going to make you the money that you need to actually move this forward. So I think there's two or three conversation or questions you should probably ask yourself as you're looking at that land. One is, what attractions, experiences, activities, excursions, or draws are already in my area, right? So what kind of experiences are already there that I can tap into, that I can point my guests to? Because at the end of the day, if they're not in your area, you're probably gonna have to create them, right? And so does your land allow you to do that? So a lot of people do a good job, and some people don't, of leveraging what the local experiences are. It could be anything from food tourism, it could be hiking, mountain biking, snowshoeing, wine tasting, whatever it might be, fly fishing, but leverage those, but have a good understanding of what's there. Don't make assumptions, really figure out what kind of infrastructure for experiences are there. Second obvious question would be, what kind of unique experiences can you provide for your own site? So remember, it's easy to get people to go glamping one time. It's harder to get them to come back again and again and again. And people don't go glamping and just sit in their units and their structures all day long, right? They want to have a comfortable space, but they're out there doing something, right? They could be hiking, they could be walking, but you have to have something unique on the property that keeps people there, and not only keeps them there and happy, but what can you do and provide. I think sometimes people make an assumption that I'll just figure it out and I'll just, there's always going to be a solution. The reality is that sometimes you just can't do certain things that you expected to do. Some could be the amount of, the type of water or the type of waste system or septic system that you are going to provide, spacing. A lot of times people have this vision of glamping where they were going to have units super spread out because they want the privacy, which is great, until you add up the cost of what it takes to actually put the septic infrastructure, for example, in there, and all of a sudden everybody's pro forma goes out the window. And so I think it's a healthy exercise at the beginning to know just what your limitations are and what you can't do, so that you're not figuring that out down the road and then almost being disappointed in where your project's at. So I think those are some healthy starter questions that people can ask, and things to consider as they're looking at what type of land. And then also, the last part there is really having a good understanding of what the percentage of your land that you can actually develop on. So a lot of times people they'll see, wow, I've got 50 acres here. Well, maybe you can only develop on 5 of them because of a floodplain, because of the slope of the property, because the soil is no good, and you can't actually put structures on there. So a firm understanding of the amount of percentage of land that you can actually develop, because that could make or break whether you want to move forward with that plot of land or not.
Turns out that from the plan that is imposed by the local government, you can only use 1/5 of it, or you can use 1/10 of it, depending on the plan of the local authorities. And then the problem arises because I have land for like 10 domes, but I can actually set up only 1 or 2. And this, I think, is especially crucial because we can say that we have 2 types of people, right? The lucky ones who already have land, and they, I don't know, after their parents, grandparents, or they just bought it, or they, I don't know from where, but they have the land and they know they want to use it, they want to monetize it. Or the people who are searching for the land. So the first ones, we can give them the ideas and we can tell them, okay, check what you can do there, use the land, use its potential. If it's there, it shouldn't be like, empty. So it's good to then navigate to local authorities, ask them, okay, listen, I have this and that plot. What are the limitations? What can I do here? Is there any plan for it, or is there none? Should I apply for a plan or should I not? And then we have people who are searching for the land. And I think that here should be some crucial advices what to avoid. Because I did have clients, I don't know how about you, I bet you did, that bought the land and they didn't check what they can do with it prior to the purchase. And then they ended up with the parcel, which seems to be perfect for glamping, but they cannot build. So did you have such histories as well?
Yeah, no, what we always say is obviously there's no glamping without the land, and it's the part of the process or part of the project where typically there's no turning back, right? So once you get your land, once you acquire it, that's it. And yes, you can resell it or hold on to it, but you might take some losses on that, or maybe that wasn't part of your whole plan to land bank the property for a long period of time. So it's an important part of the process to be as diligent as possible, because that's what makes it real for many people. You spent the money on the land, you've purchased it, you've researched it, and maybe you bought it outright, or maybe you have a loan, but the clock is ticking one way or the other. Because even if you bought it outright, if it takes you longer to get your units up and running because of permission complications, you're not making revenue off of the structure. So for every month that you don't have the property up and running, you're losing money. And not necessarily losing money because you have a loan, but losing money because you could have been charging for guests to be there, and now you don't have that money coming in. And so it is by far the most important part of the process. And yeah, unfortunately, over the years, we've seen scenarios where people didn't do their research and couldn't develop what they wanted to develop. They couldn't develop where they wanted to develop. And unfortunately, they made some expensive mistakes. And the reality is, I know nobody wants to spend the money on the front end of the process, but having a good engineer, having a good architect, working with certain consultants, on the front of the project, you could spend a little bit of money, but the amount of money that it saves you from not making more expensive mistakes down the road is meaningful. And one good example is, we've seen this in the past, is the reality is, if you're using septic, for example, because you can't tie into the main line for wastewater, that has to be thought about first. Many times people, they get so excited, rightfully so, about the type of structure and the experience. We're going to have this great hangout area, and we're going to have this, restaurant. All that's great, but septic can typically only go in certain areas because of soil, because of maybe where a leach field needs to go, the slope of the land. And sometimes people buy and purchase a plot of land thinking that their structure is going to go here, but maybe that's the only place that the septic can go. And so it completely changes the layout, the site planning, the design of where the whole thing, what it looks like, and maybe it's no longer a viable project for you. And so, and then even on the permission side, people, they will go forward with the project and realize that they can't get the correct permissions.
Let's just wait with the permissions. I will stop you here.
Yeah.
Let's just wait with the permissions, because I would like to kind of go into permission processes a little bit deeper in the next point. So I wouldn't like to start with it. I just wanted to see if we can make some essential, to-do list before I even approach the glamping project. I have written some down for myself, and I would definitely advise checking the status of the land. So, okay, I have this and this large plot. What can I do with it? So check it if I can build anything on it. So learning more about the land I either have or I want to purchase, learning as much as possible. Then the infrastructure, how I'm going to plan it. Is it possible to connect to a municipal network, or do I have to build it at my end? What is my budget for it? So maybe even first we should put the budget, so how much I want to spend on the land, structures, infrastructure, and then kind of put below, okay, so status of the land, cost of the infrastructure, and how I can put it. Then the land preparation, because we were talking about the septic, but then we also need to talk about the paths, the roads, electricity, decks or concrete slabs, depending on what we are setting up. But let's say we are setting up the domes because we are from FDomes. So the wooden decks, how big the decks, elevated, not elevated, longer. So all the land preparation, and I think also at the very end, but still on the list, should be my target group, because depending on the target group I want to attract is the size of the unit, but what follows, it's also the size of the deck, so it's a cost of the deck, and then it's also a size of the sewage tank, if I'm going to have separately for each dome, or maybe I will have one bigger sewage tank for 2 domes. As you mentioned, I think that the crucial element, and I know, and I totally agree with you, when planning larger resorts, so not like 1-2 domes as Airbnb, because it's much easier when it comes to planning, because I have my limitation, I have 1 or 2 domes I want to use for Airbnb. which makes this, I would say, large planning process a bit smaller. But when I'm planning between 5 to like 20 domes, I really need the architect. I really need the engineer. I really need someone who will point me out my mistakes and the things I haven't thought about. Are there anything you would add to the list?
Yeah, no, that list is a good list. And, a few other things come to mind, even just, we talked about wastewater, but water itself, in many of these properties, having access to, if you can have local water, great, but can you actually drill a well, or how are you getting the water? Because the reality is that for any type of hospitality, guests just run through a lot. It's just a water intensive project. That's just the reality of it, and that, as you talk about the type of target market and the experience that you're providing, if you're providing showers or a bathtub or a hot tub, or if you're doing laundry on site, how much water do you really need? Because sometimes that's not as straightforward as people think it is.
Yeah,
The
I will
roads are
stop you
important
here when
too.
it comes to the water, because it's very funny that you just said it. I was visiting one site, glamping site, that decided on water tanks. And actually it was all, as you said, it's about the calculation. And it's so good that you mentioned it, that you need to calculate the water usage, because we had the situation, I was staying there with my friend, and we ended up not being able to shower for 2 days because there was no water in the water tanks. And the land was so remote that they needed to wait a day or two for the new water tanks. So when they brought the first smaller one, the water was gone before we even got to, we were even had a chance to take a shower. So we had to wait 2 days, which is not a glamping experience anymore. It's more
Right.
like camping, and very like hard camping experience. And then when you have no electricity, it's exactly the same. So these calculations you just mentioned, that how much water people can use if you're having water tanks, for example, it's very important, because once you have people already at your site, you don't want to think about the problems when they appear. You want to have them planned before it happened. So,
Yeah, and even to the water too, as we overall conversation here is permissions. Many times for remote locations, people forget that there's gray water considerations. In some areas, you just can't dump the water wherever you want to, right? In some you can, but be very aware of what your county, what your jurisdiction allows you to do for not only wastewater, but for gray water, because sometimes there's very particular instructions and items that people need to check off of before they can do that. But yeah, water, I mean, roads too, for remote locations, you gotta have it. You gotta make sure you can get an emergency vehicle in there. And so sometimes people want these, very spaced out units, but then it's, well, how are people really going to access their unit? Is it more of a walking path? Is it more of a driving path? And what does that do to the overall experience? If people are paying $650 a night, they don't want to have a car's headlights be shining in on their unit when it's somebody else's. So the design and the site layout for roads is important. Insurance, as you look at a piece of land in that certain area, just making sure that before you get this, and this is more for the owner and the operator and for the insurance provider, but it's still a very difficult thing to really get the type of insurance that people want. It's going to be more expensive than people think. So that's going to play a factor into maybe what you can afford for your land. And then also there's an assumption always about local labor. If you're building out something, it depends on the type of project you're doing, but anything that you need to get local labor to help you construct, whether it's decking or assemble the domes or whatever you need to do, sometimes people just assume there's always going to be people there to help out. And that's not always the case. Labor is hard to find and it's a bit more expensive. And we've seen all sorts of stories of people just leaving projects because somebody's paying them more for another project. And so, making sure that you've got the local labor in the land that you're looking at that can really bring the project together. And then also, as you're looking at your land selection, are you running it or is somebody else running it? Because if somebody else is running it, or if they're doing the turnover service, are they somebody that lives close by or not? Do you need to provide employee housing essentially? Because many times people won't include that in there. They won't include it in their cost. And then, we get a lot of comments, and this is just a reality where finding somebody that can come in and do like the labor, but turnover service or the general manager, if you're in this beautiful remote area, you may not be able to pull from a large talent pool because, they have to drive an hour and a half to get to your property or whatever it might be. So what do you need to consider for the people who are working the property, and where are they going to be set up is important for, I think, that land selection up front as well.
Wow, that's true. Wow, Ruben, thank you. Well, and that brings us to this permission process that you have just mentioned a second ago. I imagine, and I know from the experience that, of course, permission processes are different in Poland, in Spain, in the US, in Canada, in Mexico. But one thing I know for sure when it comes to putting anything on the land is that it is different if you just purchase the land or you have the land and you want to start the glamping business. It is different if you already have a camping or RV park and you want to set up, for example, a dome for a restaurant or for the common area, or just add like few accommodation types to just differentiate the land. And it's also different if you are building just, wedding venue out of the large dome. What do you think should be always the first step when I think, okay, I'm going to set up a glamping resort, I want to have the domes, I want to have the restaurant maybe. What papers do I need? Who should I contact? What should I do?
So there's a few universal truths, and then there's a few other things that I think might be helpful to give people context to so they can help navigate. The magic word and all that we do here is always depends, right? Because it just depends on your state, depends on your county, depends on the type of land, depends on, do you already have permissions? Are you asking for additional permissions? Are you just looking for a conditional use permit? So yes, every state and every county just has different ways of how they're looking at this. And as a reminder, that because every state is different, there are some kind of universal truths that you can go off of and navigate. And as we even take a step back before we look at the papers, to your point, you have to look at what type of project you're trying to do, right? Because if it is a greenfield project, so a piece of land that has not been developed, there's going to be different approaches to that versus, do you buy an RV park and campground that already has permissions that you can easily kind of upgrade and add more glamping style units, right? It depends on what you feel is going to be a good fit for you, because sometimes people will look at an acquisition of an RV park or campground and say, well, it's a little bit outside of my budget. But if you add up all the additional infrastructure and items that you need to put together and consultants that you may need to work with and engineers that you may need to work with on a greenfield project, it could be the same price or cheaper.
But
it just depends.
Let's just say that we have the situation, because we know that it's easier when you have the campground or the RV park to just add the units. It takes less time and it's just easier because they already know it's there. They already know the experience. They already know the vibe of the place. So with the authorities, it's kind of known. Whereas when you're purchasing the land or you want to develop your land, I know that it's much harder. I have clients who have been waiting for the permissions for 2-3 years, but I also have the clients who got them in like a month. So yeah. Of course, as we say, it depends. It depends on the country. I have a client in the US, in Michigan, that actually is going to be our guests in the upcoming webinar, so stay tuned, because she will be talking about the first dome being set up in her state. after the struggle of, I think, a year and a half. So she said she broke the ice and now everybody can set up the domes there. But let's say that we have the land. We know that we can build on this land, more or less, that we already know about all the details that we have just discussed a minute ago. So where to put the septic, we have a plan, we have the architect. I'm going to the local authorities. What papers should I bring with me to tell them, hi, my name is Joanna, I'm smiling, I want to have a glamping resort. And then they are like, what?
Yeah. Well, my recommendation, yes, is always start as most local as possible, because there's going to be different levels that you need to get up to, all the way up to the state. And sometimes the local entities will view these differently than the state. And many times, like in the state of California, for example, local counties, you're allowed to do something that's different than what the state allows you to do. But I would recommend starting as local as possible. And first, research, right? So you want to go onto every county has a website that gives you a bit more about their code and infrastructure and what you can and can't do and the categories that exist. This is important because maybe your best shot at getting approvals is being zoned as a campground, or maybe your best shot is a conditional use. You just want to see what buckets exist through the county first, so that you don't walk in there and say, hey, listen, I've never done this before. We're about to buy this piece of land and we're going to put up 10 domes. The difficulty with that is that sometimes at the local level, remember who these people are, right? They really don't want to go out of their way. They're just trying to do their job. They can't change any of the wording with any of the documentation. They're just trying to enforce it. And so when you come in there and maybe say, we're going to do this great thing, we're really excited about it, we're going to put up 40 domes, A, you might scare them a little bit, and B, maybe they don't know what a dome is, and maybe they just say, listen, I don't see the word dome in any of our language, so you can't do it, right? So my recommendation is always to do the research on the website to see what buckets and categories exist, and then to reverse engineer it, for example, because maybe there's wording within what the county does where it could be a semi-permanent structure, right? So if you come in and say, looks like I want to put up 10 to 15 semi-permanent structures, and here's what the land is going to look like, you've already now gotten a few more yeses and inroads to it, versus if you say the word dome, or if you say the word, whatever it might be, and type of structure, again, remember who these people are. They're not going to know or be in a position to really change what that outcome might look like. So it's very, very important on the front end of the process to be not only educated, but an expert in those types of levels, and I just call them buckets, of what type of structures can go up. And a lot of times working with, yes, that local engineer who's done this a million different times, who knows the people in the office, who can point to different projects that they've been working on and help you navigate the wording and the narrative of how you're trying to approach this. And so, as you look at documents, depends on what stage you're at, but they're always going to be asking the same questions about kind of sewer, septic infrastructure. They're going to want information about the types of structures that you're using, because they're going to want to make sure that it fits into certain buckets, right? Because maybe in an area that they're in, they say, well, it has to have this type of snow load, or it has to have this type of wind load, or what's the dimensions, because hey, here you can do a type of structure that's this amount of square footage, but as soon as it goes over, it's a whole different category. So a plan in place so you can show them what you're trying to accomplish is going to be critical. And there's nothing wrong going in there prior to that, but I would go in there prior to that only in a research mode and being curious to get the type of information, because unfortunately I've seen this in the past where people have gone in, a bit more on the front end of the process saying, I don't know, we might do this and we might do that, and we're going to do this. And it's slowed them up because, the people that are at the local level are just like, man, I don't know if they're going to get it together, because I remember seeing them here on the front end of the project and they don't really have what they need. So, always work when you can with somebody who's been developing in that area, get advice from other operators that are there. But first and foremost, when it comes to documentation. It's more even on the research side of the documentation, what permissions, what buckets exist at the local level so that you can reverse engineer and say, you know, actually we're category number 2, and let me show you why we're category number 2, and doing it that way. And you know, I know that kind of feels like a weird answer, but that honestly is what helps people, because I've just seen it in the past where people come in and say, I'm doing this, I'm this structure. People say, well, we don't do that. And then now you're stuck, right? Because now the leverage is on the local side versus understanding how the, you know, for lack of a better phrase, how the game is played and how you can maneuver the language that they already have. And then going from there really, really typically works best for people.
Wow, that's a very nice piece of advice. Yeah, the snow and wind loads, as we talked recently, there is, like, few years ago, setting up a glamping resort was just in the blink of an eye. Now, as we know, all over the world, it's not only US, it's not only Poland, Spain, Canada, it's getting more and more into the permission processes. There is less and less states or lands that can be just freely used, apart from Texas, which is totally a state of mind and the state of the United States, and we love it. But yeah, it's like getting harder and harder. So I remember, like, this one client that I have already mentioned. She was like, okay, so my local authority meet every month, once in a month. So if I fail to deliver one document, I need to wait another month so that they can have it at the second reading. And then if they ask me about something, then if I bring it, I need to wait another month for this document to be accepted. So yeah, I think that this good research and finding, I think we can use the word as well, a loophole for the specific type of the structure I want to use, because we have this with the domes, right? Sometimes they can be set up as freely as possible, and sometimes they need to meet a building code. So we are working over achieving certain indicated R value with our insulation. So we put 2 layers of the insulation on the walls of the dome, then 3 layers of the insulation of the ceiling. Why I'm putting inverted commas? Because it's a dome, so it's very hard. Then we need to calculate what is the angle where the roof starts, when the walls start. And of course we are able to do it. But for example, with us at FDomes, if we have a client coming over telling us, listen, I need this R value on the top, this R value on the walls, how can you help me? And then we are just like 1-2 days contacting our engineer, and we are like, okay, so you need this 2 layers of the insulation on the walls, 3 layers on the ceiling, and we are able to achieve the R value. And of course I will be talking about it later on as well, but the snow and wind loads, same story. So I think that not only does the research or the architect at the very beginning of the process help you with the permissions, but it also helps you with actually getting the product that you need for the land, because you're able to give your supplier, or like to us, to FDomes, the list of the requirements. Listen, I need this and that size because I have the restrictions. I want to have a bathroom inside, so I'm falling under the building code. I need this R value, this wind load, this snow load. Can you meet it? And we are like, yes, we can. Just give us some time to give you the calculations. But what I also know is that when you put the bathroom inside, sometimes, maybe not always, but in most of the countries, when you put the bathroom inside, it already becomes a permanent building and it falls under the building code. Am I correct or am I wrong, Ruben?
Depends.
Thank you.
It really depends. It depends on the county and depends on the state. Like, good example, I just go back to, California is always the hardest to develop in. And so, that's on one side of the spectrum. But for example, in California, for a soft-sided unit, so anything that's not a permanent structure but considered canvas or soft-sided unit, you're only technically allowed to have a 110 outlet in there, no running water, technically, right? So you can't have running water in the unit, so therefore you can't technically have a bathroom in the unit, but you can have it attached to the unit. It just can't be within the unit. And so in some areas, they are considering a bathroom is a permanent structure. You know, a certain square footage becomes a permanent structure, and you've got to go to residential code. You know, there's all sorts of different examples of what they might consider, and you want to avoid those, obviously, because, you know, building up to a permanent structure standard, more residential. You know, we've seen people in certain areas where they've been requested to put in a fire mitigation system, so like a sprinkler system within the units.
Yes, in the
as
domes.
part of it.
Our story as well. Crazy, yeah.
You know, and so I always like to take a step back and just say, listen, throughout this, and I've seen this in all sorts of states and all sorts of counties, you know, it's really about looking at this holistically and being flexible, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to educate the people at that local level, because most likely they haven't seen 50 of these other projects. And so you have to be able to create this narrative and a plan that shows to them that you know what you're doing, you're going to be a good steward of the land, you're going to, you know, create more vibrancy within the local economy. So it really is this narrative versus a checklist, because, you know, a really good example is you could have all the checklist. Great, I've done all of this, but then all of a sudden you get a notice because a neighbor doesn't like, you know, the type of operation that you're going to put up, and one neighbor can really derail a whole process. And so being able to work not only with the neighbors to get their support, get letters of support from local businesses as well, that's not on the checklist, right? You look on their website, that's nowhere to be found on, you know, in certain areas. But being able to know what hurdles can really derail a project are also important, and neighbors is that perfect example. You can have a perfect plan, you can have everything set up, and one neighbor says, nope, I don't want that type of operation right next to me, and could really derail a project.
I totally agree. I also know such an example, as you have just mentioned. Amazing project, spectacular location, all the permissions checked, everything up and running, and the neighbor comes in. So that's why I put as well somewhere in my list, I think we kind of flowing here, but how important local community is as well. So it's not only the permission is the one thing and the local government, local authorities that we start with, but I think also educating the people around my land what I'm going to build there and how it's going to help you as well and your businesses, because we can either let them to start imagining what's going to be there. Is it going to spoil the land? Is it going to be loud? What they're going to build there, especially like, you know, with these weird shaped structures. And if we are going remote, we are going to remote destinations. People are not aware of geodesic domes either, or like other unique accommodation types. So we are actually, as FDomes, opening a glamping resort. And this is what we did last weekend. We have a large land with the lake, and we organized like run, which was a celebration of the anniversary or whatever. And we kind of gathered local community and told them, like, listen, we are the investors here. This is the land. It's going to be developed to develop your region. And they were happy, and they were very excited about the new project that will actually bring more money to the town. The same with the clients we are looking at. We have the clients in Canada whose local specialties are oysters. So once in a week they cooperate with the supplier and they have this experience of the oyster tasting in the domes. Then we have a client who is in the remote location in the Polish mountains. So he cooperates with people manufacturing honey and like local like cheese, so on and so forth, delivering this this local food to the domes for the visitors. So I think that kind of making the community aware what you're going to build there and how it can help the community, how it can help you, and what is your added value as, I don't know, a shop owner or a restaurant owner, or someone doing, I don't know, yoga classes in the area, or some tours, guided tours. I think that making people aware that the fact that I'm opening a glamping resort here, of course, it will be maybe annoying for you because there will be more cars coming through the village, but on the other hand, look, these are the advantages. There will be, it can develop your business. You will have more support, like you will have more Instagram followers. I know it sounds funny, but it's truth now. Like internet is everything now. So kind of building relationships with the people who are in the area I'm purchasing the land or I have the land, especially if I'm not local and I'm someone who is just like, you know, outsider coming and just buying the land. It's very important, as you say, also to have their support in the later permission processes.
Yeah, correct. And, you know, change is different for people, neighbors, people who've had other pieces of land that are bordering or local community. You know, maybe that's a third generation piece of land. Maybe, you know, they've been living there or using the land for 20 plus years. So any type of change is tough for anybody. And I think it's helpful, you know, to zoom out and look at the industry as a whole, because compared to traditional hospitality hotels, you know, glamping in particular just hasn't been around for as long, right? And it's a smaller percentage of the hospitality sector. So that means not as many people from localities to investors to banks to businesses, maybe they just don't know what it is and what it isn't. And we've seen those examples. I mean, we've had to talk to many counties and write many letters where people see a new glamping operation that comes in, and the neighbor says, whoa, you know, I don't want a bunch of 18-year-olds coming in and staying up all night and partying. Like, that's not what we're here for. And we educate them and say, listen, this property is going to be charging $650 a night. I don't think high schoolers are really going to be paying $650. It's just a different clientele.
Yeah.
And so that plan that you create, that's why we always say it's such a vital part of the process on the front end, because this becomes your story. This becomes your narrative that you not only tell through the permissions process, but to banks and investors. And a lot of times people just have a very limited understanding of the glamping sector as a whole. And because of that, they make, you know, different decisions than maybe they should have. And so I would just tell people that there needs to be, especially if you're doing a more greenfield development or project, an understanding that you're really going to have to educate, and you're really going to have as many conversations as possible. You're really going to have this plan that's buttoned up that shows people what it is that you're trying to do, what it is that you're not going to do, and to really advocate for this end result, to let people see your vision. Because I think people really hit a wall when they think, because you're excited about your project, because you love it, because you see it, that's automatically going to translate over to anybody who just sees your website. Like, that's just not the case, right? And that the expectation that people should be as excited and are going to get it right away, that's just not reality. Yeah. And so being prepared to educate through a narrative and really a story that's buttoned up and clear and transparent is just an ongoing battle that really never ends, even when you're up and running, because maybe you're expanding, maybe you're trying to refinance, maybe you're trying to do whatever. That storytelling and that narrative side of that business plan you use with permissions, you use with banks, you use with local vendors. It really is something that you should spend a lot of time on the front end fine tuning, for sure.
Perfect. And if we were to create very quickly, because we are very talkative, Ruben, I know we always are, but the time flies. If we were to quickly just put the most important documents that we should have on hand when going to the local authorities, just without any, like, talking about it, just a list of documents. We would have a site plan, right?
Correct.
We would have the information about the structures, so maybe some architectural drawing of the structures on the land, presenting how it's going to look like.
Correct. And a spec sheet that goes with that. So a lot of times, even if they see a plan and information about the structures, they want to know, height and weight and things like that. So a spec sheet for the structures. So
spec sheet for the structure. So we have 3 documents. What else?
Many times, I mean, this is something that you're going to need to do with septic, but if you have a soil study,
okay.
So you're going to, in certain areas, the soil is just different. And so you have somebody that comes out and does a soil test and does a soil study and that type of documentation, because that could make or break where you could put the structures, because maybe that type of soil doesn't work. Within that site plan itself, there's going to be, I think, other things that you can consider, but the most part is just going to be that even you can have some kind of a landscape architectural plan in there as well. That just helps people know that you're being thoughtful around it. A lot of times people come talk to the county prior to purchasing the land, because they want to know what they can and can't do. So having any type of documentation that kind of shows that you can actually capitalize this project. Okay. So it shows that you've got your loan documents tied up, how you're going to finance this project. I think it's important for them to see that you can actually do this, that they're not wasting their time with you. Hey, maybe 5 years down the road we'll do this. What can you actually do to kind of capitalize? If you've been working with an engineer, they'll often provide different documentation that you can bring in for, septic specifically. If you have to do anything with a well, that type of documentation, but an engineer will be the best to kind of pull that together. And many times they have basically a little presentation that they'll put together that will go there. But that's always a good place to start. And then again, I always kind of go back to making sure that there's an ability to not pigeonhole, not put yourself into a corner prior to that first conversation. I would come together very well researched with the documentation that they have on the county website for the types of structures and permissions and what does that look like, because then you can point to, hey, we're this category over here and here's why. So yeah, that's always a good place to start.
Perfect. Well, and let's say that I have all the documents with me. I have done my research. I know that I have a green light. All is good. I bring the documents to the local authorities. How long from the moment I have the documents to the moment I will be actually able to start doing something on my land have to pass? Is it, again, it depends.
Depends.
Thank you. But the best case scenario and the worst case scenario maybe. But just to, maybe not to discourage, just to be a realist.
Sure. Yeah. To the example that you gave earlier, I mean, we had somebody that we were working with not too long ago, got all of her documentation ready to go, told her to have all of her folders. She walks into the local office and they basically said, this is in Texas. And they said, it's your land, do whatever you want to do, essentially is what it was, because of the size of the project. And she paid a quick fee. I think it was $50 or something. And then she was off and running. We've seen other projects that are years in the making because of the size and the scope. And then, everything in between. So I think if you have the land acquired, if it's something that's a bit more shovel ready, it's a few months. Within 1 month is a little quick, because typically you're missing something. They need a different test. They want to see something else. So just be prepared for that back and forth. The good news is I've yet to see a project not get off the ground when people stick with it. So as I talk about that mentality of being an entrepreneur and being flexible, you sometimes have to change maybe the number of units. You sometimes maybe have to change where you want to put them, or some type of amenity. Maybe the bathroom has to be outside, or maybe you have to change the size of the decking. So just be prepared for, what does speed things along is how quick you can move. Because all of a sudden something can come back and they say, great, we need these other things. We're kind of confused about this. And maybe you're just not ready to move quickly on that. And so, I think a lot of the speed often has to do with how quickly you can move as the operator versus, the county itself. And then to your point, depends, but most states there's going to be an opportunity, obviously, for the local county or local residents to comment. There's a commenting period. There's going to be an open forum type of deal where people can come into their set meeting, like you mentioned, once a month, or sometimes it's even not once a month; it's once a quarter. People have an opportunity for public comment. So having that holistic plan and knowing your timeline, because I think the one worst case scenario there is when you don't map it out correctly, all of a sudden you're starting construction maybe right as winter's about to hit. And now you have to wait a whole other year. So that timeline and that project management side of it becomes a really big part of that thought process on the front end.
Totally agree. So we have it covered, and we are kind of striving to the end. I know that the plan was to start with the American Glamping Association support, but I would like to refer to what you said about the permissions, so that you need to bring the static calculations, so the snow and wind loads, you need to bring the R value, you need to bring dimensions. So now let's talk about seeking assistance. So let's say you decided on DOMS at FDomes, and you're contacting FDomes, you're contacting myself or my colleague Damian, and you're like, okay, we need to have R value, we need to have the static calculations. So from our point, if we have clients coming over to us telling us we want to open the glamping resort, our first question always is, can you send me a Google Map pin of your land? Because our engineer is going to calculate the snow and wind loads that are required on this particular land. Sometimes people are very surprised, why should I send you the Google Map pin? Funnily enough, all over the world we have different lines written in the maps, engineering maps, and being on left or right side of this line may change if you need the standard framework or the HD framework. That is why we always ask about it, to make sure that once you actually hit the local authorities with the static calculations, they are calculated for your particular land. And it happens all over the world. So we do it for the US, we do it for Canada, Spain, Dubai, everywhere we are asked about it. So from our side, when approaching what you have just said about the papers, when the clients are coming to FDomes, they are able to receive, firstly, after being asked about the Google Map pin, we tell them, okay, so you need the HD frame or the standard frame or the HD plus or whatever. What we can see in this picture that it should be presented now, there is like this picture of the dome in many different colors. So this one actually shows the wind load. It shows how strong the structure needs to be to withstand the wind load of your land, of the indications of your land. And if the clients require, because not all of them need it, like I don't know how it happens, but even in the US, it is not required to have the detailed static calculations document. But if it is required, either prior to the purchase or even afterwards, let's say after half a year, there is like, I don't know, some controlling team coming over to your land telling, this dome doesn't really look so safe at your location, then we are actually able to send each of our clients the static calculation sheet presenting that this size of the dome at this particular location meets the local requirements of snow and wind loads with this particular frame type, and it is being calculated and presented. When it comes to the drawings, we can see that we deliver the drawings of the dome's dimensions, not only diameter and height, but also if you're planning to put a bathroom inside or other interior modules like the kitchen, bedroom, whatever you want to place there from our portfolio, we are able to give you all the dimensions along with the dimensions of where to let out the media in order to just put the bathroom and connect it. We are able to give the deck drawings, which also makes it easier when approaching the permissions, because you will show people what is the base for the dome for your project. And actually, we are now working on more and more documents, because as we are going through all this conversation, Ruben, we know how hard it is getting all over the world, and actually we are now working on delivering as many documents as possible. So plumbing, electricity schemes, all these exact drawings, all the exact drawings depending on the thickness of the frame. So it is all being processed to make the permission process for our clients the easiest and the most seamless as possible, so that we as FDomes, we are able not only to provide them with the product, but also with all the support beforehand. How about the American Glamping Associations? Because the FDomes will have all the documents covered, let's say, regarding the domes. How can American Glamping Association help maybe not only American clients, but also the clients around the world? Because I remember you mentioned you do have clients in the UK, in Spain, in Poland. So what can you do from your side to make this process easier and faster?
Yeah, I think, like you said, obviously having all of the research in order, knowing first and foremost what are the local requirements, right? That is number one, because again, nobody knows. There isn't one person who is completely educated in every local requirement that there is. And so that's really your job as the operator, is really to become an expert to the best of your ability within that, and then being able to pull together any of the additional, documents that you need. But there's two or three things that come to mind, but one would be assisting with, and you can do a bit of this on your own, or we can assist with this, is trying to find an operator who maybe is in the same county, or maybe close by, maybe has a similar project or something a little bit different, because the amount of the fact that they've walked the path before you is just critical, right? They've got information that nobody else has. They can save you time, sanity, and money as well that nobody else can. And so that's something that we do help out with, but something that you can also do on your own, figuring out who might be in the same area and getting in contact with them and picking their brain and figuring out who they, what mistakes do they feel that they made, because at the end of the day, no project is built the same. And even if you come into the same county, it might be looked at a little bit differently because your project is smaller or bigger, or, maybe it has a restaurant or maybe it doesn't have a restaurant. So making those connections is going to be huge. We do talk with counties, and many times counties will say, hey, listen, I just don't understand what this glamping thing is. I don't want to say come back later or whatever it might be, but they're just not really into educating themselves. So we can come in and say, hey, this is not a type of project where it's going to have a bunch of 16-year-olds coming out and party, and here's what the glamping industry looks like. Here's a few other projects that might be in your area. Here's a type of clientele that it typically brings in. Here's what it can bring to your local economy as well, and here's some of the benefits when it comes to vendors or restaurants or anything and everything. They're going to be spending money now in your area, which is something that you're going to want to have. And so we do write letters, we do talk with the local county. And then we also have some other tools and resources as you're here on the front end. No project is built the same. No county is the same, but what we do have is a great network and a community of people who've been there and done that. And you don't have to do this alone. A lot of times, if you're listening this now or down the road, you might have been in a scenario where you felt like you couldn't really communicate with somebody. Nobody knew what you were going through. Our networking community has not only the experts, but also operators who might be a few years ahead of you that can help. And they love being able to turn back around and give guidance and give feedback and give advice, which again, saves you that time, sanity, and money. So we also just have those tools and resources internally, for our members. So we're just a member-based organization. And so, we do take a look at where everybody's at individually and give them some additional guidance. And we talk with our members, on the phone and over email, and we can help point them in the right direction. And sometimes people need a very specialist as well, which we have in our network. It just depends on what, there's been some crazy examples out there that people just had to figure out, and we're able to help connect the dots that are there. But the main thing I would say is many times the counties, and this is the same thing with a bank or an investor, they want to know how they can trust you. And when you're doing it alone, it makes it harder for people to say, all right, you've got this. So our recommendation is always to build it. If you don't have a team, or you don't have advisors, build a team and build advisors, because it's only going to help you down the road. And, when it comes to permissions as well, that's just part of the puzzle, right? It's part of that narrative that we talk about, where people want to know that you're going to do this and you're going to do it well, and you're not going to mess this up. And not that I'm saying that people haven't done this alone and won't continue to do this alone. That'll still happen. But when you can point to a team, even if it's not equity partners, and even if it's not a co-founder, but even advisors, or even it's like us saying that you're part of the association and that you're doing the work to get educated on how to be a best steward of this type of project, this stuff always helps. There isn't one magic button that you hit and everything works out. It really is a collective of different things that you need to do and to provide to get the projects moving forward. And we always say, you just have to be scrappy. I've yet to see a project get off the ground that just didn't have a high level of scrappiness. There is no, I'd follow these 5 things, I'm good to go, and there'll be no friction. You just have to be prepared to battle a little bit, to be scrappy, to problem solve, to be flexible. But when you have the right people and the right manufacturer and the people that can support you, you'll be fine. You'll get it up and running.
Yeah, we somehow delivered almost 7,000 DOMs all around the world, so it is doable. And I know that this webinar was very informative and showed the whole perspective from being, okay, you need to do this and that, you will have problems with this or that. But the truth is that if you look in our portfolio, and we are just one of the glamping suppliers all over the world, but if you look in our portfolio, you have so many spectacular locations, so many DOMs around the world. So it is doable, and it is very rewarding at the very end of the road. So you can drink a champagne and celebrate your success, because what you're going to get at the end of this road is really breathtaking for all the visitors. And actually, you're going to make a difference if you're looking into the eco-friendly resort with no bricks and mortar stores and hotels, something friendly, something open, something close to nature, something that people are really looking for nowadays. I think we will take a very short break to prepare for the QA section. So if you haven't put your questions to the chat yet, this will be the time to do it. And we will be back in what, 3 minutes? Oh, 5 minutes. My friends told me 5 minutes, and they are navigating all this meeting. So in 5 minutes, we are back along with Ruben with your questions, and we will answer your questions after the break. And we are back after the break. I think, Ruben, that we talked a lot because there are not so many questions. I would even say I was expecting much more, so I think we did quite a good job. Hopefully, yes.
All right.
Yes. So I do have a few questions, so I will read them out, and and we'll decide who is going to answer. So the first question was, one of the things I would like some idea on what to call my tourism project. Should it be eco-resort, camping, agritourism? What would be the most easily permitted? And the idea is to go to local authorities before buying the land. So we have no land, how to call it to get the permissions easier?
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't get hung. There's two versions of this. I think whatever you want to call this to your eventual target market and to your guests will probably be different than what you want to talk to the local authorities about. So again, yes, I think it goes back in researching first what categories exist and honestly figuring out what pathway through advice and talking with other people that would make the most sense. So there isn't one term that universally across every state, United States, other countries always works. It really has to be localized based off of the permissions that exist there locally. And then you could always change it. You can call it camping just to get it pushed through. And then, as you advertise and as you on your website, you can, rebrand it to something a little bit different.
Yeah, I also think that we should kind of differentiate the how I would call it a back office and the marketing side of the glamping side, because once we are talking about the permission processes, we should start, as we mentioned, from digging into the permissions at the local authorities and then navigate the process to get the permission. But how we call it and how we advertise it, how we attract the people, this is a completely different story. And here, this eco-resort, agritourism, this is something that should be rather considered as the marketing name, I would say, rather than the name for the local authorities. So I totally agree. The second question is, have all the architecture engineering already be done before you go to the local authorities? So I think that, as we mentioned during this chat, that it's good to first read about it, be prepared, check what are the names, what is allowed, what is not allowed, and then go to the local authorities to say about our ideas, and then go back with the permission and the application as the second step.
And usually you'd be working with an engineer and architect that knows that area. So it's not like they'd be coming in blind, not knowing what is required. So working with those other professionals, they should have a very good understanding of what the holistic view and requirements will look like. So, I think that's a key consideration.
And we have a question about the ballpark figure. What would the engineer, site plan, soil study, etc. set me back for? And as the supplier, before I ask you this question, because I think, Ruben, that you will have a better idea about the price for this extra non-accommodation aspects of the project, what they can be. As a supplier, I know that there is a difference between the architect and the architect, between the engineer and the engineer. That's why we also have Ruben with us today, is that, for example, American Glamping Association, but if you have any association connected with glamping or camping in your country, or you have a good supplier in your country, like we can be like this for Poland, for example, as FDomes. We have Ruben, who is experienced in the US, Canada, Spain. Add me more countries, Ruben, because you were listing me all these countries. We have Latin America that you are into when it comes to glamping. Glamping Association has an amazing profit. It gathers specialist in glamping industry. So when you contact an engineer, you know that you will contact the engineer who knows glamping, who knows how to approach the subject. And very frequently I had the chance as well to work with the engineers who were learning the glamping concept themselves. So of course the process will be easier and faster if you find the engineer and the architect who are into glamping, who have already done or are in the association, rather than, I'm sorry to say that, but a random engineer just to have the engineer, because then they may struggle the same as you struggle when approaching glamping as the project. This is my experience. I don't know how about you, Ruben, but I think that finding a right person for the job is crucial.
Yeah, people who have experience, it will make a difference because you won't have that learning curve of educating them on, what this looks like and some of the intricacies that just come up. So yeah, definitely agree that if you can find somebody who has the experience within the space, it will save you time. Definitely.
And of course, when it comes to a ballpark figure, I think it depends on, of course, on the quantity of the domes, the land, the size of the project. But can we give at least some between, like from to? What price should we expect? What cost should we kind of navigate to in our calculation?
Definitely depends on the scope of the work, but it'll be a few $1,000s, anywhere between 3 and 15, depending on the type of work and size what they're trying to do. But you can also get a feasibility study through other organizations that really help. It is not, for example, a soil test, but what it does do, it does help you think through some of the data and some of the items that you'll need to bring to the county and validates your plan. And those are usually around $2,500 for a feasibility study.
And last but not least, about Spain. And I know, Ruben, that you know something about Spanish reality. Yeah, and I totally agree. There is a discussion in Spain whether domes are permanent structures or not permanent structures. And it's very difficult to get answers about it locally. So as a matter of fact, it also gets harder when it comes to permissions. So do you know anything about permission process in Spain for the domes?
Yeah, the reality is that if you are working in Spain now, the realities of the Spanish government, and nothing is going to move fast, right? What are they always going to tell you? Mañana. So the nice part is that there should be at the national level a little bit more indication on what that might look like. But my recommendation would be, it has worked out well when you bring in other people into the conversation. So easy for them to pass people off. It's so easy for them to say, not interested, no thank you, not interested, no thank you, or whatever it might look like. But if you can leverage other people who've done projects, if you can bring other voices into it and add that additional pressure, that's always going to help. I mean, it's slow. It's the response time and everything, the hoops and the red tape. It's tough. It's tough, but I think bringing in other people who have done those conversations always helps.
Yeah, giving examples always helps. That's true. Yeah, we do have several clients in Spain. I was even helping with setting up a dome near Ronda, near Malaga. So it's doable. It's just a matter of, I think, connecting with right engineers. It takes time, that's true. And I do have experienced clients who are running hotels, restaurants, and eco resorts in Spain already, and still the process takes longer. It's just a matter of the bureaucracy, and this is something that if you really believe in the project, you should just follow the steps that you're indicated. Maybe learning if a dome will be permanent with or without the bathroom, what are exactly the indications of calling it permanent and temporary depending on the province, because it will be different in Andalusia, it will be different in Catalonia. So definitely learning this as well, and then approaching us, and we will also do our digging in on our side. And that's it, Ruben. We kind of got to the end of the webinar. I'm really curious how many people stayed with us till the end. But thank you so much. It was so valuable experience. It was so much knowledge that I think I will be listening to this webinar several times to kind of soak what you have just shared with us. It was amazing. Thank you so much. We couldn't have better guests than you on the first webinar about permission. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. No, thanks for the time. Glad we were able to do this.
Yeah, definitely. We'll see each other on the glamping show for sure. Maybe earlier as well. So thank you again. And we are going to have the second webinar from the series in April. And this time we are going to approach permission processes and all the struggle from a completely different perspective. So from a client's perspective. And we do have confirmed one of our Canadian client, one of our US client. We are now searching our European maybe clients to join us to share their experience. So if you're interested in joining us in April for the second webinar, so the permission process from the perspective of a client, subscribe, join us, and like watch our newsletters, subscribe to our newsletters, and we will be letting you know. Thank you so much. All the contact details will be there after I disappear. And if you haven't managed to ask any question on the chat and you still have some questions to me or to Ruben, you can contact directly us and we will navigate you to the American Glamping Association as well. So thank you again for joining us and have a lovely afternoon or evening depending where you are.